This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch channels with Liz Mugavero, Cate Conte. You're an author. You're a best-selling author of 3 mystery series, 2 with Kensington Books and 1 with St. Martin Press. And so we're going to get into that, but we want to let everybody know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So if you use coupon code GHOST, you get 1 month free premium subscription. And this podcast episode will be on Newsly later today. So thank you for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
It's always great to talk to a lot of creative people. We've talked to authors, we talked to musicians and film directors. What made you want to be a writer?
Oh my gosh, I was one of those really nerdy kids who was never without a book. I used to force my mother to read to me from, the time I would get up in the morning until she had to actually stop and do other things. And then as soon as I could read, that was all I wanted to do. And I used to steal her books and read them. And then when I got old enough, I would sit at her typewriter back in the day. She had a typewriter, and I would just type out chapters just to see what it felt like. And I just always had that dream of wanting to bring stories to people.
So this episode, I think we're going to focus on how to find your voice as a writer, as you can see scrolling below. How did you find your voice?
Yeah, I wish I had an easy answer to that. It was kind of a long process. I just started writing very young. I was always fascinated by crime. It might sound weird, but I was from a very young age. I think my parents were a little worried about me. I did have a grandfather who was a detective, and I was young enough that he didn't tell me a lot of the stories, but he told me some, and it was fascinating to me. So I always had a lifelong fascination with crime. So all of the stories I would write, even as a kid, had some kind of a, crime happening, sometimes a murder here and there, even when I was pretty young. The very first research paper I wrote for school was on a famous murder case here in Boston. So yeah, I definitely knew I wanted to tell stories about mysteries and, things that really got into the why of, why people did the things that they did. But it took me a while to find my own voice, because I did write the very first novel I wrote was not a mystery, and it didn't really hang together for me. I think I need that body or that crime to kind of focus on, to really bring out the things in people's characters that I want to touch on. But yeah, it was a lot of trial and error, and I think I'm still tweaking to this day, right? But as you write more and as you listen to your authentic self and as you're writing what you want to write, I think it's easier to kind of come around to your own voice.
Yeah, being a musician, it's a big problem today where a lot of people like to clone work to the point that they sample exact pieces of music. And as a producer, I'm always talking to young musicians, and I listen to their demo, and then they want to sound like something in the top 20. And I'm like, I like what you're doing in your demo. And so there's so much like kind of peer pressure or some kind of societal pressure to kind of mirror what's popular. And instead of actually accentuating what you have as like what is uniquely you. And as a producer, I always point out that like what's uniquely you is what your advantage is. We can make that sound like the best it can be. So as a writer, did you have mentors, or did you have writing groups or different people that helped you along the way? I mean, how did that process happen?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really until I got to grad school. So I went to Emerson for a graduate degree in writing and publishing. And that was really where I was able to start working with professors who were novelists and, people who wrote for different types of mediums, that I really felt like I was able to find my way a little bit more. And then after I graduated, I should say there was a writing group that I had before I went to, I think while I was in college, that it was just a group of people who answered an ad. Yes, back at the time there were still ads in the newspaper, and I remember my father had given it to me and said, "Oh, here's a writing group that's looking for members." So I had shared with them a short story I'd written, and I got accepted. And to this day, I'm still connected with a couple of those people. So that was a lovely experience. But then after grad school, I really started to think about what I wanted to write, and I came back to I like mysteries. So I started writing a mystery, and then I thought, I really need to find people who are like me and who do these things and find a network in the mystery community. So I started just researching crime fiction conferences, and I found the New England Crime Bake, which is held in the Boston area still to this day. And I just started going, and I didn't know anybody, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was really starstruck when I would meet all these authors, but I just started going every year, meeting people, and then I joined a group called Sisters in Crime. It's well, it's actually an international group, and then they also have local chapters. So I joined the New England chapter, and that was actually how I found my agent, and got my very first contract. So I really believe in community and mentorship and just networking and knowing the people that are interested in the same types of things as you.
It's kind of like podcasting because podcaster as a podcaster, I started this back in 2016, and there's a whole community of podcasters, and we kind of help each other. We guest on each other's shows, and over time, you get a better footing. You get more known because like you have other people doing what you do. And even being a musician, we have beta listeners, or like
Mhm.
beta readers, I guess, for
Yeah.
writers that will go and like listen to our stuff. And you'll send them like a private link to your SoundCloud or something, and they give you feedback, and you say, hey, am I going to publish this or not based on, kind of gut feel. But sometimes we just still publish it, even like feedback, just because like it's part of a project. But
Mhm.
it's interesting, that tools that you have in your toolbox. Maybe you can talk about more about like what's the most important tool that a writer needs to have in their toolbox, because you're also a like you have a creative process where you're like a mentor, right? You do your creativity
Yeah.
coaching.
So a couple of years ago, I started thinking about how how it when I first started writing, I was really lucky. Or when I first started writing in the mystery field, I felt like I was really lucky. I didn't have, I don't know, I just either I didn't come across people who maybe weren't supportive, or I just didn't listen to them. But as I um, went through my career, I did become a lot more acclimated to people who felt like they were being told, the thing you want to write is never going to sell, or I think you should think about X because that's the trend right now. And it really started to make me think like people are getting the wrong advice, right? And it's kind of like what you said earlier about the demos and wanting to sound like someone else. And one of the things you're encouraged to do when you're pitching in the writing world is to have comps, right? So it's this book meets that book, and I think the idea of that is it works, right? Because it gives people a feel for what the novel is. But I think some people take that as, well, I got to write like this person in order to, or that person, or both of these people in order to sell my book, which it doesn't necessarily mean that, right? And I spent a lot of time, uh, despite the fact that I didn't have a lot of people doubting me and my abilities, like I spent a lot of time doubting myself, and I had to learn to use things like meditation and mindfulness and really kind of digging into things that you encounter in your life that might be stifling your creativity, right? Because I feel like that's the biggest block to people who want to create but are not able to create. So for me, I think mindset is actually the most important tool that a writer can have. So if you go into it with, I'm going to write, I'm going to do the best I can, I'm going to write the thing I want to write, I feel like you're going to have some kind of success. Versus if you go into it thinking, I suck at this, I'm not going to be able to do this, or I have to write like so and so, or be on the New York Times bestseller list within my first year of being published. That's like the wrong mindset, and I feel like it's going to stifle your creativity a little bit because you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself. You're maybe not doing what you want to do, and you've just kind of got that negativity kind of driving you. Versus like, I just want to create, and that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah, it's kind of like being a musician. Like I've been a musician since I was 17, and like a lot of musicians, like when the ones I was with when I was 17, most of them stopped because they wanted like instant gratification, and they weren't really doing it because they loved it. They thought it was gonna be like the next big thing, like the Beatles or the Monkeys or something. Like, well, that's not gonna happen, right? But but a lot of times, it's like you do it because you find different avenues. A musician, we've got all kinds of things we can do. I do like video game soundtracks. I do advertising. I do music for like therapists. that need music. People need music for the website. Music is like on all different levels. You can do a lot of things with it if you open your mind to like, oh, well, if you think you're only going to be on this one list, then yeah, maybe you might fail. And the thing is, like, I think failure is part of the process. And some people get so like, oh, I'm gonna fail. So then they never show anybody their work. I've talked to painters and photographers and all kinds of creative people that don't show people their work. Well, how is anybody gonna know about it if you don't show anybody?
Yeah, totally. Totally. You have to take a chance, right? And nothing's a fail. I don't think anything is a failure, right? If you're doing something and you're putting yourself out there, you're at least learning from it. So you might not get published the first time around. I didn't. It took me 10 years to get. So when I like started writing in earnest and started writing, I had a couple of books I had already written. I was pitching, I was revising, I was, networking and trying to figure out how to get them published. It took me 10 years, and those weren't even the books that got published. So I like to say after 10 years, it happened overnight that I ended up with an agent and a contract for something completely different,
Mm.
but it was 10 years.
Yeah, the overnight success story. A lot of people don't realize how much work people get into. Like musicians, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of songs sitting on the table.
Yeah.
And in tons of different variations of groups we've been in before we actually connect. And so people think it's like suddenly see something, say, oh, that happened overnight. Like, no, it's a big process. It takes a
Yeah.
lot of work, and every step of the way, like you don't really fail. Like with a music, most of it doesn't connect. It's like rare that something connects. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean it doesn't help you get to where you're going. You get to figure out what you want to do as an artist. What could you see what connects to your audience? Like we get an instant gratification. Like if we play and it connects, you can feel people immediately feeding back. As a writer, like, is that hard, like to know what your gratification is? Like, how long does it take to get that feedback loop? Like when you put something out, how long does it take for you to know if it's working?
Yeah. So before I was published, I had my writing group, and I had some people in the crime writing community that I would share my stuff with. I would practice pitching a lot. I would practice pitching both without, like not with agents and also with agents. So, sometimes you get feedback right away and they're like, no, thanks. And others, it's like, oh, well, if you kind of positioned it like this, maybe, come back to the table with with a different angle kind of thing. Um, when I'm writing books today, I usually don't show anything until I'm done my first draft, and then I do have a couple of beta readers, and I send it off to them. I get their feedback, and that's before I turn it into my editors and all that. But when I'm working with people who are trying to start writing or improve their writing, I love for them to show me work consistently, right? Because I think the more you're trying and the more you're evolving, the faster you're gonna
Hmm.
figure out your voice and figure out how to master the technique, and that's ultimately what's going to get you somewhere. And again, it's not like that first thing you write has to be the thing, but it's helping you learn how to write better. It's helping you distinguish your own voice and establish yourself in that field.
Now, as a writer, I was talking to somebody that was like a productivity or they're not actually like a writer, but they help people who have blocks in productivity. They were productivity, like efficiency expert. And that seems kind of counterintuitive, but the idea that some people get blocks and then they don't know what to do or they don't know how to be consistent. And
Yeah.
did you ever have that kind of problem, or you're just the type of writer where this kind of flows? Like I'm a musician, everything kind of I just flow all the time. I got all my stuff behind me. I have my instruments like in my room, so like I don't have to say, "Well, I got to go to the practice center." Like, all right, there. So I do it like automatically. I just do it. But some people they have a problem sometimes with getting in blocks or not being know how to get out of those like lulls. Have you ever had that kind of issue, or how do you teach people how to get out of that?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say I envy you to be flowing all the time. I would love to be in your shoes. That would be amazing. No, like I've consistently written, but I did go through a period of time where I couldn't get out of my own way to figure out what I was writing, to do it well, to stick with something long enough to to finish it. And it goes back to something I think I said earlier about, you kind of, you grow up, even if you don't have people telling you, oh, well, you aren't a good writer at all, you shouldn't think about doing this as a career. Even if you just have well-meaning people in your life who say, because I had this, right? Like I always wanted to be a writer, and I had told my parents that from very young. And I remember when I told them I was going to college for that, and their response was, oh, that's nice, but what's your backup plan? Right? Because it was kind of that mindset of like, you'll never make enough money doing that, right? You won't be able to support yourself, and you'll be back at my door looking for money. But I was like, no way. Like, and so as much as, in my heart, I knew like that was like a limiting belief. I think you kind of internalize these things, right? And this happens to people from before they even realize it's happening, right? It can happen in your first grade art class, and someone could tell you don't know how to paint a tree well, and then you just never paint again. I mean, I got kicked out of dance class when I was a kid, so I still to this day cannot.
I mean, a big problem,
right? So, yeah, I think we get these blocks built up over time, and then yeah, and then we kind of, we sort of start living
it's
with
like
that
the arts.
idea. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it just seems like the arts are everybody always like, well, what's your backup plan? Like every time I talk to like musicians, we run into all the time, painters, photographers, people are like, really? Like that's what you're doing is like, are you going to be in anchor or or like your 9 to 5? And, it's hard to get people to like, oh, they don't trust you could actually be a creative as
Yeah,
a career, but they don't realize how much art is everywhere. There's creative writing and music and photography and all kinds of things that are corporate. And so the idea that you can't, you know, make it like certain levels, like I said, like certain like places that you're trying to go. Like if you're trying, being a musician, like yeah, if you want to be in the top 20, that's hard. But
yeah,
if you want to be a working musician that found a different way of doing it, like video games and soundtracks and independent films, there's all kinds of stuff you can end up doing that you would be surprised, and you can get more attention. You could actually do it. You could actually work. And people, yeah, I think you have to get out of that mindset because sometimes your parents can limit you, like your friends can limit you, and you have to find that kind of courage in yourself, right, to go for your dream. Because most people are like, well, your dreams, why would you go for those?
yeah, 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 totally. And I was kind of at that place where I was, like I said, I was still writing, but I didn't know, like I kind of lost faith in like, was I going to be able to do this for real? Was I wasting my time? And then that would make me feel really bad because I knew that from ever since I was very, very young, this is what I always wanted to do. So I was introduced to Julia Cameron and The Artist's Way. This was back 20 something years ago. And that was kind of where I realized like, oh, there is an actual process to getting yourself out of a block. And so I started going through that book and doing all the exercises and, over time, like adding in my own processes and things like that to, a lot of the work that Julia Cameron teaches. That's kind of how I approach people who, want to write, who are, I have a membership site for writers, people who want to write, don't know how to get started, don't know if they're, don't have enough confidence in themselves to, think they can actually do something with it. And a lot of it starts with going back to those things that you may not even know consciously, right? And you have to really think about and let come back up for you, like the teacher in first grade, or the thing your parents said to you without really knowing how much it affected you, and kind of figuring out what those things are and making a commitment to yourself to kind of overcome those beliefs and those blocks, and really just owning your abilities, right? And just starting to use them wherever they take you.
It seems like yeah, there's always this struggle. I think with um even in my day working, like it's creative. I do design work in software. And it's a different part of my brain, but it's still creativity because I know that it didn't exist. So like everywhere I work is like it's a lot of creative stuff. I'm not just doing like repetitive stuff. I have to do a lot of kind of out of the box. And I think that's why I like being a musician is the fact is like a lot of what I do is like try to do something new. You're trying to
Mhm.
create something. And I think creative people, when I talk to creators, I've always been very interested. I've never been the kind of person to sit there talking sports or talking this. It's more like I want to talk about like why do you want to do this? Like what style do you want? I want to get into the whole like the process of being creative. Um,
Yeah.
and so there's an interesting thing that was brought up in like questions you like to answer is like creative recovery. And
Mhm.
what is creative recovery to you?
Yeah, for me, that's a lot of the going back to all these old stories, and that this is something that you might think, oh, you do an exercise like that and you figure out what those stories are, and then you commit to telling a different one and it's done, right? It's never done. That's what I found out about creative recovery. It is never done. It's kind of a circular journey. You're always coming up against things that shake your confidence or that make you think, oh, I'm never going to get to where so and so is, or things like that, or I'm never going to be able to write this next book, or
Mm.
fill in the blank. So for me, it's staying in touch with those exercises, I'll call them, that helped me so many years ago kind of get over that initial hump, and just kind of going back to like, all right, I'm really feeling stuck in this book and I feel like I can't write it. I've written 18 books. I have no idea why I feel like I can't write this next one, but what's going on right now? And kind of tracing that back to whatever story I can find that is making me feel that way, and then telling myself a different story is really important. And I do a lot of meditation, mindfulness practices. For me, all of that stuff hangs together. I journal every day religiously. That was something I also learned from The Artist's Way. Julia Cameron teaches that you should write 3 pages of morning pages every day, just kind of a brain dump of anything, just to kind of clear that space in your head. That's made all the difference in my life. And if I didn't journal every day, I just don't feel right if I don't do it. And I can't create anything if I don't journal first thing in the morning.
That's interesting because one of the things I found what I do is I do what I call like a stream of consciousness. So
Mm,
like I'm in my recording studio and I just put my multi-track on and I'll go sit at my piano and I just do a stream of consciousness every day. Every day I just do something and like I just what I find is it's something I was reading about Frank Zappa and Neil Young and a bunch of like Bob Dylan. He used to have his typewriter. And he was hanging out with the
mm,
band and he would just have his typewriter in the basement at Big Pink and he would just be going off. Everybody's like, why do you have that there? Is it because like I'm watching you guys, I'm getting ideas. I'm just you just
mm.
do it, riff it. And I find that like doing that is very powerful process because I think the problem is their logical brain tries to overthink things and then it tends to tell you, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. But if you let your creative kind of self just go, you don't have those limitations, so you don't overthink it. And of course, you got to go back and maybe fix things, but it is a really cool launching pad to keep from having the blocks. That's what I feel.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And to that point, so when I was little, I took piano lessons for like 10 years. So I started when I was 5 and I stopped when I was like 15. And recently I felt like I feel like I need to go back to it, just as another creative outlet, right? And so a friend was lovely. She gave me a keyboard that she had in her basement and hadn't been using. And I've been trying to play around with it and just use it to activate a different part of my brain if I'm feeling stuck and
Mhm.
I'm not any good
Yeah,
anymore. I have to, but again, there's another story, right? But just playing around with it is helpful because it's
yeah.
doing something different with your hands.
Well, I always like challenge musicians to jump on an instrument they're not comfortable with and
Mm,
actually try it. And you find that sometimes, like the instrument, you feel like, oh, well, you got to be real comfortable to write a song on something. You got, if you're a guitar player, to write it on the guitar. But sometimes, like going onto a piano and actually not being the best piano, but being that songwriter, you can write something, and you're not Billy Joel, you're not some fantastic player, but you could create something that's fantastic. And we could, as a producer, say, you know what, I don't need us play that because it's actually your authentic voice and it's good. It's like it's you. And so
yeah.
sometimes people think they have to be like such an expert. They have to be so much perfection that sometimes they don't realize that that imperfections in art, happy accidents, and not being perfect is actually part of the beauty of it.
Totally. And I think that's another thing, right? We all put so much pressure on ourselves to, again, be the Billy Joels, be the Dennis Lehanes, be the whoever, right? In whatever field we're in. But we lose so much opportunity doing that, right? And even when I'm stuck in a book, sometimes I've been trying to do this a lot more often because I'll get in the mindset of, all right, I've got a deadline, I've got to get moving on this book, so I've got to write the next scene or chapter or whatever. And then if that scene or chapter isn't perfect, it's stressful. So I've been trying to just not even open my manuscript and just go to either a notebook or go to a different, like a completely blank document and just start typing and just seeing where it goes. And that way I feel like if it's out of the confines of the official manuscript, right, it doesn't
Mhm.
have to be as good. So I can play with it a little bit more. It's such a weird, like the way our minds work. It's so interesting.
Yeah, that's always a cool thing, 'cause, like, when you're with the band, sometimes, like, you're in the project, you're writing it out, and then somebody does something that's, like, outside of it, and they're saying, "Well, this wasn't part of what we were doing, and I don't know." They're like, "Oh," but that a lot of times what happens, if you know the history of music, is the song that was outside of the context of what they thought was supposed to be the project
Mm,
actually end up being better than some of the stuff they were doing within the project. And it actually gets
mm,
put into it because, like, wow, because sometimes you have to walk away or
yeah.
come from some outside input. Like one band member, like the drummer, writes a song at home and he puts on a demo and this tape, and he comes in there and he doesn't really show it to anybody. And then he shows it and like, wow, that's the one. That's what we were missing. Right.
Yeah.
So they sometimes being in the context of the process, you you do kind of need to take outside or come back. I find that that's very cool for the process because sometimes you get wrapped up in the lane and you don't see the big picture, or you don't, you know, you miss some.
Definitely. Definitely.
So you're into mystery and crime, and one of the questions you like to answer is how do you compelling mystery? And I would think because the crime is kind of compelling because it has all these things that happen. I mean, I get drawn into crime dramas because
Mhm.
I tend to like to watch them, and I can understand why. But is that one of the compelling things that brought you into like mystery and crime? I mean, just the compelling nature of it.
Yeah, again, for me, it always comes back to the why. Like the crime itself can be fascinating, and that's definitely a component of it. But like, I'm just fascinated with the way people's minds work and the way these things kind of happen, right? Because usually it's in the world of crime, it's usually someone right? And so, what pushes someone to kill their wife and throw their body into the river, or whatever it is that happens. And I think it's really kind of digging into the characters. So even the person who's committing the crime can't be black and white, right? Can't just be a bad person who did this bad thing and that's the end of the
Mm.
story. Like, there has to be layers and layers to it. And for me, that's the most fascinating part. So what could prompt somebody to go from this person that everyone knows who maybe wasn't a bad person, but something happened. So what was that thing that happened, and how did that make their mind just change, right? To kind of get to the point where they're committing murder or whatever it is. So that's one of the things, like just really compelling characters and digging into characters' backgrounds and just keeping asking those questions of, so what happened in their life, how did that affect them, what was their childhood like. So I really like to get into the backgrounds of the people I'm writing about, whether they're the good guy or the bad guy, and figure out what makes them tick, because usually even with the good guys there's a lot of secrets, and there's things that are making them take a
Mhm.
certain approach to solving the crime, or whatever it is. So everyone's got so many stories and so many things that drive them, that to me that's just the most fascinating part.
Yeah, does it kind of start with the building the character? Because I know I talk to fantasy novelists, they do all this world building. But it
Yeah.
seems like if you're doing like a crime mystery, then you're happening like it's like a microcosm. It's like I got to build this character building. Like they kind of give him layers, like the way a fantasy guy builds this world, like a Tolkien or something. This big gigantic fantasy world that has all these aspects and kingdoms and different groups of people and the politics and all that stuff. You start building that. But when you're dealing with like a more human focus rather than the fantasy focus, you're dealing with like the layers within the mind and
Yeah.
maybe the outward appearance, like the different like the masks that people wear, because
Yes.
that ends up being like hey, this character appears like this, but deep down they're like that. Or they have, all the fast that nobody even thinks they could even be that person because they have this outward appearance and they can, upstanding citizen and this and that. You wouldn't even, think that they would even go there. And that maybe that's what drives it, makes it interesting.
Yeah. And that's one of the fun parts of, plotting out a mystery, right? So sometimes you start with the people, sometimes you start with the crime. It really depends on how the ideas come, but then it's kind of figuring out not only who the murderer is and why the murderer did it, but also who are the suspects, because you have to have obviously you have to have multiple suspects in these books. So who are the suspects? Why are they suspects? And then what are those other secrets that they have that make them look guilty, but they're not
Mm.
actually guilty of the crime that we're trying to solve? So it's a lot of imagination and storytelling, and it can be a lot of fun, which I know sounds odd when you're talking about murder, but it can be.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like in a mystery, the protagonist and antagonist. So is the person that commits the crime tend to be like the main focus, or the person who's trying to solve the crime, or do you vary it? Or they have
Yeah.
equal the focus of like yeah. I heard your pet. It's okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So I currently I'm writing cozy series, and when in the cozy series, they're usually set in like a small town or a small community, and so oftentimes most of the suspects, if not all, are people that are in that community already. So you're focused on a number of people usually, and there's, like I said, there are people who may look guilty because they have something else going on in their life that they don't want anyone to know about, that's making them look guilty, and they just happens to be coinciding with this crime. So it's for me it's like introducing and eliminating suspects throughout the story until you finally get to the actual murderer.
Mhm. That's cool. So, oh, they also have this, I guess you have this character, Violet Mooney. Talk about her, 'cause I'm not familiar with your character. You It's a witch?
Yeah. She's a wit. Yeah. So this is my most recent series. It's called The Full Moon Mysteries, and this is kind of, so when you were talking about fantasy and world building, so this is a paranormal mystery, and there was a lot of world building in this one because it takes place in both the witch world and then the mortal world. So Violet is a 31-year-old shop owner, crystal shop owner. She owns a crystal shop in a small Connecticut town, and she also reads auras, and she's been doing this all of her life. She just kind of thinks like this is a skill she has. And then through a series of unfortunate events where someone in her community is murdered, she finds out that she's actually three-quarters witch, and her long-lost mother and a stepsister or half-sister show up back in her life and tell her that, hey, by the way, you're a witch and you have to accept this about yourself, and you owe it to the witch community to come back and take your seat on the magical council and help rule the witch world, because we're going through some challenges right now. So that's been a really fun series to write. She in the first book, it takes place mostly in the mortal world because she's just kind of getting used to all of the things that are being thrown at her. But there's some aspects of the witch stuff. But then in the second and third book, you get a lot more into this second world and the parallels and the differences, and her getting used to being in two worlds at once. And it's been a lot of fun to write.
So when you have a series like that, do you have your fans like that are like anticipating the next um novel in that series, or do you like limit it to like what is like three books and it's not going to keep on going, or do you keep it open that maybe you'll keep that character open for multiple books in the future?
Yeah, we always hope that we're going to get renewed more than three books, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, it is tricky, right? You have to, usually in in the cozy world, you get contracts for either 2 books or 3 books. So you kind of have to be aware that, there's always a chance you might not get renewed, but um, you have to kind of figure out a way to wrap things up, but also leave things open. You want to give people a satisfying conclusion, but also leave things open to come back in the future.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
So yeah, it's a hard balance. So
That's how
those
I was
books,
wondering. It's like a trilogy is like, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So those
I
books
was
I
just wondering because the
actually,
format of like a lot of things are trilogies. Sorry.
yeah, and I was thinking of this. Even I do hope to write more Violet books for sure. The third one just came out in March, so or in April, I think. But for me, like the way those books, the story of the books came to me was in kind of a trilogy format. But I feel like there's going to be kind of
Mhm.
multiple, with this first stage of her initiation into this world of witches. It had a story that could be told over 3 books, and it worked out, perfectly that way.
Well,
So
that's always cool. Because I think as a reader that, I've always been into like a fiction reader, I mean like Tolkien. I
yeah,
like books that have like, sequels or
yeah,
prequels. And
yep,
so it's kind of cool to you get brought into those worlds. Um, and so I think there's a lot, it's interesting because as a musician in our market, we've got people that only want to listen to something for like 2 minutes.
hmm,
But in the book world, you have their attention. And as musicians, like I'm child 70s and I like albums. I still like to write in album format because it's like telling a story. But
yeah,
I'm living in a world where people just want a playlist and they just want very short vignettes. And I'm like, I'm more of a long form person. So do you find like in the writing world, do you have limitations on how long books can be? Because of the way people's attention span are today? Is there certain like industry standard that you have to follow?
yeah. So there's multiple genres within mystery fiction. Some of like thrillers are usually a little bit longer. So contracts for thrillers are usually like 100,000 words or so. For the type of books that I'm writing right now, the cozies, the contracts are usually between 70,000 and 80,000 words. Mine usually end up somewhere between 75 and 80,000. So like 350 pages or so. But that's what people expect, right? They want
Mhm.
to, they want to know the characters, they want to get invested in them, but they also don't want you to belabor the point. So
Yeah, yeah. So it's cool. Like to me, it's like I'm always like very intrigued when people are willing to stay with an artist.
mm,
In the book format, a lot of musicians are like, how can we get people to draw in people like authors draw in people? Because a
yeah,
lot of times when we write, like our one song isn't the whole story. A lot of times we have multiple songs that kind of go together, and we
yep,
have a market that people miss that story. They only hear one of them. And so it's very frustrating, as an artist when we've got like these connected things and people only hear one. And then you go, oh, most people didn't hear the whole thing. But
yeah.
yeah, it's like so we're trying to like, okay, like I talk to authors, it's like, well, what can we learn as musicians from authors that we can draw people in more so they'll actually stay with what we're doing?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I know for, again, I'm thinking of cozy audiences, right? The people who love to read cozies, oftentimes they love those books because they feel like they're coming to a friend's house or a friend's town. They are familiar with the community, right? They know what to expect. They know that they're going to go visit the, XYZ coffee shop and there's going to be all these different kinds of coffee there that they like, or they're going to go down the street to the library and they feel like they know the librarian. So I think it's like that sense of community that maybe people are missing in their own lives or just want to see more of. So that is an interesting question of how to translate that to music, because I feel like you're right. Like there have
Well, I
been
think,
bands that I've been
yeah.
following. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the things that what we do is like we play live. The way we can get people to do that is like, you know, on Spotify, you hear one song, but when I do a live show for an hour or 45 minutes, then I can draw you in And that's part of the whole point of being like a playing musician is you try to get weave those songs. People do kind of get this feeling of a connectedness from your performance, and you're trying to you're like a storyteller. There's a little bit of theater going on. A lot of what we try to do is do theatrical things or things that are, or as a writer that like when we put it together, we're trying to get a feeling across that's a connection that draws somebody in, and we can do that when we do live performance. But in the way the world is for streaming, and we assume as a community, it's harder to get that. But from a live performance, we can do it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, do you go to like book conventions and author conventions, and do you connect readers in that kind of way, or do you primarily, I'm not sure, like what that world is for authors today.
Yeah, totally. We have lots of
How about
conferences.
book signings and things like that?
Yeah, there's lots of conferences. It's nice this year. We're getting back into the real swing of things after the pandemic. Feel like this is the first year that things have been like really all the way back. So that's nice. But yeah, there was actually one a few weeks ago in Bethesda, Maryland. It's called Malice Domestic, which a lot of cozy readers and writers congregate, and it's a lot of fun. There's another conference that's fabulous. It's called BoucherCon, and it moves around every year, so it's in different spots. That's another big one, and that encompasses like all the genres in the mystery world, which is really fun to get to hang out with different kinds of readers, different writers. So yeah, there's a lot of them. And then, there are opportunities to do signings. Sometimes libraries will reach out, or book clubs will want you to come and talk to their members. Yeah, so it's been nice. I've actually been getting back into the swing of doing some of those. A lot of them are still on Zoom, which is lovely because you can go to libraries, across the country and talk to people.
Mhm.
But it's nice. It's nice to be connecting with people because the readers are really the reason why we're doing this, right? We want people to like our stories and resonate with them and, connect with them. So it's always great to meet readers.
About the audiobook format, have you been into that? Have you done audiobooks like with professional voice, or have you done them like yourself with your own voice?
Yeah, so my two of my series, my Cat Cafe Mysteries and my Full Moon Mysteries, are on audio, but I'm not involved in the process. So my publisher handles that, and they're read by professionals. It's funny because people always ask, will you come to the whatever event and read from your book? And I always say no, I'm not reading.
You don't
It
you're not
takes
you don't wanna do
it
that.
takes people think just because you wrote it, you can read it well, but it takes like a real voice actor to do that. Like that's a skill. I do not have that skill. I can write the words all day long, but I'm not
Oh,
good at acting them out. So
that's interesting. 'Cause some authors, they really like to do that, and then I actually have talked to authors like, "No, no, no, I'll leave that to, like, actors." And
yeah,
then it's kinda well, like, if you take your book, you give it to a director, turn to a play, a screenplay, or movie that how much of that do you get involved in? So you let your publisher kind of handle the direction of like the art direction for that. You don't get into the micro level of that. You let them take it over.
yeah. They've never asked me to get involved, so they just said, "Hey, we sold your audio rights. Here's when the book will be out." So that's it. I've listened to a couple of them. They have the same narrator reading for both the series, which is great. She's fabulous. She does a really good job. Amy
Mhm.
Melissa Bentley, I believe is her name, and she's really good. So yeah, they would not want me doing it. Trust me.
But some people have like I guess it depends on how like controlling your vision. So as I've talked to some authors that are controlling their vision, they want to do the art direction. Right. They're actually like working with the director and like yes or no, or really 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 deeply involved in that aspect. But then there are writers that are like, I'm not,
Mhm.
that's not my thing. I'm a writer, and
Yeah.
they can take that, and I'm not interested in that. So have you ever like wanted to have your Are your books being looked at for like teleplays or film rights like that?
Not yet, but I hope that's coming. That would be awesome. And I don't know, would I want to be involved in that? I actually just talked to someone on my podcast. I also have a podcast, and I just spoke with someone who's an author, a novelist, but also a writer for TV. And we were talking about, how do you, if you have a series, how do you get your books in front of people in Hollywood or what have you. And so my question to him was, should you write your own pilot for your own series and then try to pitch that and go to them as a writer, or do you leave it to the pros, let the agents connect with the other agents and kind of let them run with it? And he actually, his recommendation was, if you have an agent and they have connections, just try to get them to buy your series and then they'll do what they will with it, kind of thing, which I thought was interesting. But I guess it comes down to like, do you want to keep writing more books, or do you want to like turn and go into TV writing? So there's a lot of things to consider, I think, if you're, pondering that route. I always thought it would be really interesting to
Yeah,
write
it
for
seems
TV.
like
I'm not opposed to it, but yeah.
it seems like a totally different discipline girling in plays. They for like Playhouse 90 and he like Planet of the Apes initial like screenplay for that. He wrote that.
Yeah.
And in this seeing that type of writing versus like the it's a different type of style. It's a different um set of skills to actually make it work in TV or film. It's like a different type of writing, and it seems like you have to really kind of go into that world. And if you're in the book pure book world, it seems like a different set of skill sets because it's a different like canvas. And even like if you're a musician and you start doing like if you start working on video game soundtracks versus a song, it's a totally different thing. You almost like actually get a game and we have to watch it like a film. And we have to score it like a film and we actually watching it and scoring it. It's not the same as when you write a song, you're kind of just doing what you want, but you have to kind of do what fits the film. It's not exactly your vision. You have to fit into the director's vision.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it's
that's
like,
really
it's
cool.
like the more people involved, some people are like, well, I don't want to deal with these other people. So I guess
Yeah.
you have to know yourselves. Like, do I want to deal with this group think, or is it my world and I don't really want to be in part of that group? I guess it's a matter of like deciding how much you want to open up to that.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think you're absolutely right. It is a completely different skill set, and it's not one. I've dabbled with it, but I've not written a pilot or a screenplay or anything like that yet. So, of course, in my mind, I'm like, oh, I have to go take some classes, and I have to learn how to do. And that's a whole other rabbit hole that I'm like not willing to go down just yet. So we'll see. Maybe someday.
Maybe the future though. Maybe the future
Totally.
might be something like if you get yeah, never know where you want to be. Like, you had somebody 5 years, ago, would I want to do a video game soundtrack? I was like, I don't want to do that. And then now we're like, oh, that's kind of cool. So it's like, it's like you never know when you're ready to do it. Then you're like, yeah. So you kind of grow as a person. You figure out if you want to take it on. And it's like a lot of times it's like you gotta learn so much. There's like, oh, do you have the time to do that? Do you really have the interest? Are you the dedication to do it? But so as a creativity coach, that is like you have a podcast and you're a creativity coach. Like how much of that do you feel is like part of your writing process, or does you silo it, or do you think it's part of the whole thing, your whole um being as a writer?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I do think that it's part of the whole because, again, like I think about my whole journey as a writer and how long it's not that it's a long time, but how long I've been doing it, how long the time frame was from when I started to when I got my first book deal and started publishing books, and all of the things that happened in between and that have happened since. And I feel like there's so many people who want to do this, who want to write, who don't, but just don't know where to start, right? And so it's really important to me to I had a lot of champions as I was coming up in the writing world, and so I feel like it's really important to give back and to help people as much as I can with what I know and what's worked for me, and um, just hold space for people. Really, being a creativity coach is holding space for people giving them some accountability, right? Like in my membership, we do a lot of writing sessions where we hop on a Zoom, we have, we talk a little bit about our projects, and then we turn off the cameras and set a timer and we just work on our stuff for 25 minutes. And then we come back, we check in, we do it again. So it's really just holding the space for people to be able to have the time and the room and the encouragement to start creating, and then helping them see where to take it.
Like paying it forward. It's kind of like, when you decide that you're going to be a teacher or like producer to me is like, I started doing production because it's kind of like being a teacher where
Mm,
you can teach other artists how to actually, the benefit of being a musician for a bunch of years is like you can try to pay it forward. That
yeah.
you bring other people in. That you're not just like trying to compete with other people. That you actually want to bring other people in because you're like, I want the scene to get bigger. I want more people's voices to be heard. I don't just want to hear my voice. I want to hear somebody else. So I think that's really cool when you are a coach or a mentor, uh, and you offer like master classes and things because helping people out, helping other people is like helps the genre to me, helps music, helps the writing.
Mhm.
If you let other people, the gatekeepers like open the gate and let people in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I was at a conference once, about Chicago, the one I mentioned before, and I forget. I think I was published, but I don't remember. But anyway, I was listening to a keynote between two of the greats, so Harlan Coben and Michael Connolly, and they were having this conversation. And I mean, these two are super successful and really cool people, both of them. And I'll never forget one of them. I don't even remember which one said it. I think it was Harlan Coben, but he said, the thing I love most about the mystery community is that mostly everyone realizes that no one has to fail in order for you to succeed, right? So it's everyone kind of lifting each other up and helping each other.
Yeah, it's always good. Yeah, because music can be very competitive.
Yeah,
Like you can get people like, well, I don't want to show you this because then my secret sauce.
yeah,
So then you'll take it and then you'll do to me. And then some people don't want to give up the keys to the kingdom because they're like, I don't want to show you that. Because if I show you that, then you're gonna get better than me and you're gonna take my spot. And it's like, but I think what I learned, it's like when you're playing jazz, like why not teach somebody? Because jazz is is a form. It's like I want more people to play it.
yeah,
So I'm not gonna hold the keys to that capability and not teach a younger person how to do it because I'm fear they're gonna take over. It's like, why not? Like maybe it's time for maybe it's the time for people to hear them instead of me. Like so, I don't. I think it's cool when you have a community that's not trying to like keep the door closed. Like I don't want the competition because I think hearing other people can motivate you. When I hear somebody else, it motivates me to do something different. So it
absolutely.
doesn't. I don't think it actually stops me from moving forward. It actually helps me move forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's room for everyone. There's enough for everyone, and I think the more people realize that and kind of start living that way, the better off we're all going to be. And also, you know, I, I'm sure it's the same way for musicians, right? You tell me, but for writers, I know that if me and a writer friend of mine were given the same, premise to start writing about, and we would come back with two completely different books, right? Because it all goes back to you have your own voice, you have your own style, your mind works in a totally different way than the person next to you. So what one person could turn into a romance novel, someone else could turn into a, serial killer mystery, right? So it's everyone's got their own
Yeah, yeah.
voice and their own style.
Yeah, once you have your fingers on an instrument, even if I show somebody a technique, it never comes out exactly like what I showed them. They bring their own being into it. And like
Yeah,
when you hear somebody on a horn, how they do the horn is kind of like built the way they do their breathing, the way their spirit comes out of it. And
yeah,
so even if you
yeah,
show them the same thing,
yeah.
like you don't have any for them over because they usually interpret it slightly different and then it becomes a valid thing, It's like I always tell people like Stevie Ray Vaughan's version of Voodoo Child versus Hendrix's.
Yeah.
They don't sound the same. And they both are virtuosos, but they don't sound the same at all. It's the same song, but it doesn't sound the same. So one's a Texas blues and one of them's like this cosmic thing. And it'll stand in the same place, even though they're the same song. That they don't even seem the same. So that's why you shouldn't fear showing people techniques or different things they can learn from, because usually they'll do it differently than you did.
Yeah, 100%.
So for your website, if people go to cateconte.com, what can they find there?
Yes, you can find information on all my books. You can sign up to get updates from me. I send out an email every week with my new podcast episode and other news. You can find my social links to connect with me on social. I would love to have you in my community. And also, you can find out ways in which you can work with me if you want. I'm going to be opening the doors to the Creativity Lab again pretty soon. So I would love for more people to join the community and start putting their creative selves out there. I love seeing
That's
people
awesome.
really living their dream. So
I think it's great that people have their own like websites, and I've been interviewing people since 2016, and just being able to offer the links to these different points of view, and each time somebody checks out one of the guests that we have on the program, we do encourage people to click the links. They are going to be clickable when we're fully published. So the links that we have up right now, you'll be able to click on that right to the site. And we do encourage our listeners and viewers to do that, because then you can go into the depth of what we've talked about last hour and actually check out, further what we've been discussing. So we thank you for being on the program. It's always cool to talk to new voices. We do encourage people to go out to your website, go check out your books, and purchase them. However you want to. The way the world is today, people can get them in multiple ways. But thank you again for being.
thank you so much. This is awesome for you to do. This is a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. So, everybody, again, this program will be fully published on any podcast platform that you're familiar with. We're on Apple, we're on Google. I will be providing a landing page that you can send to your audience, and it will be wherever people want to listen or watch. That will be available later today, and you'll be able to share that with the audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.